As it just so happens, the 10th Legion's true martial identity was forged, not within the cold halls of Terra or amidst the confined battles of their early campaigns, but on the arid, unforgiving wastelands of planet O2-34, or more commonly known to history as Rust. It was here, during their third major engagement of the Great Crusade, that the Legion's defining military traits were unveiled, demonstrating a mastery of cold and methodical annihilation upon the enemies of mankind. Rust was a desolate world of oxide-stained deserts, pyrochemical deposits, and eroded husks of ancient forgotten cities. These ruins were not just uninhabited. Instead, they would become the domains of the renowned Crutid Claw Empire of Wardog Kul. This orc dominion spanned across more than 60 star systems to the galactic northeast of Surfenia, with Rust serving as a critical slave mining colony. Millions of greenskins toiled there alongside their countless human slaves. Short-lived captives were harvested from interstellar raids and condemned to a brutal, relentless labor that would end up killing them. The planet's strategic importance lay in its abundance of resources, critical for fueling both orc war machines and future potential Imperial campaigns. Recognizing its value, rogue trader Heydrich Zuckerman scouted the planet and presented it as a priority target for the expanding Great Crusade. In 807 M30, the Emperor himself led a massive multi-legion assault on the Orc-controlled territories, a campaign which was known as the Seraphian Offensive. The Seraphian Offensive itself marked one of the earliest examples of large-scale coordinated Imperial warfare, as 11 Space Marine legions were simultaneously supported by hundreds of Imperial Army battle groups, and they all launched simultaneous strikes across scores of orc-held worlds. Their objective was simple: fracture the Greenskins' forces and destroy each and every orc encampment in order to annihilate the Empire piecemeal before they could mount an effective counteroffensive. To the 10th Legion fell the daunting task of claiming Rust. They were supported by two secondary Imperial forces, the Ursharan Valtis of the Imperial Army and the Helginian Covenant of the Legio Cybernetica. This mission was not only to eradicate the orcs, but it was also geared to liberate as many enslaved humans as possible, estimated by some at that point to number near 1 billion souls. Under the leadership of Lord Commander Adamus Duquesne, the 10th Legion advised a strategy rooted in a merciless doctrine which mirrored those used in Old Albia, a tactic that later would be remembered as Hammer and Storm. The plan was as precise as it was devastating. The Hammer was the Legion's own armored spearhead, driving into the heart of the Orcs' defenses, while the Storm would unleash a relentless wave of infantry and support units to encircle and annihilate any who remained. The battles on this planet would rage across the toxic landscape for days, and the air would become thick with smoke and acid tangs of burning metal. Yet, despite the Orcs' natural ferocity and seemingly limitless numbers, the 10th Legion's disciplined execution and tactical brilliance proved instrumental, as the Greenskins would throw wave after wave of warriors into the fray. But their efforts were ultimately in vain, as when their machines ran out of fuel, their warriors would be quickly out of blood, and the Crutid Claw Empire would lose its hold on Rust. The Battle of Rust was heralded as an Imperial triumph, not merely for the overwhelming victory, but for the efficiency in which it was achieved, due to the extreme lack of casualties, as the 10th Legion had suffered casualties amounting to less than 1/5 of their deployed strength, a figure that was astoundingly low given how well defended the planet was and the scale of the conflict. This victory showcased the Legion's cold efficiency and unyielding discipline, along with their ability to leverage their environment and resources to devastating effect. Rust's liberation also had significant humanitarian implications. Though the toil of orc enslavement had devastated the local populaces, those humans who survived were freed and integrated quickly into the expanding Imperium, their suffering avenged through the Legion's wrath. When being analyzed, it seems that the Battle of Rust solidified the 10th Legion's reputation as a remorseless and methodical fighting force, capable of overwhelming even the most entrenched enemy positions. This engagement not only demonstrating their growing mastery of large-scale warfare, but also set a precedent for the devastating effectiveness they would continue to display throughout the Great Crusade. The 10th Legion's campaign on Rust stands as one of the most calculated and brutal demonstrations of the emerging military philosophy of the Iron Hands. Already seasoned against the Orc menace, the Legion, under the command of Lord Commander Adamus Duquesne, brought to bear a strategy rooted in Old Albia's tactical brilliance. However, that would not be the last time they used such tactics. The tactic would go as follows. The first phase of an operation would begin with an orbital bombardment, a hallmark of the 10th Legion's tactical doctrine. Their warships would rain destruction upon the surface of the planet, targeting key fortifications and supply hubs. This was not merely an act of devastation, but a calculated provocation designed to draw out the enemy from any defensive positions into open battle. The following would lead the deployment of the Imperial Army in particular, in full strength, directly onto the planet's surface. Duquesne would order them to establish a triangular deployment zone, and on Rust, that was within the wasteland plains, strategically positioned between the 3 largest Orc settlements within the remnants of the planet's few cities. With the Ursharan forces digging in deep, they would create a defensive line that bristled with artillery and fortified encampments. This would act as a deliberate bait and would be seen as a gauntlet being thrown at the fleeing enemies of the 10th, which not only applied to Orcs, but almost every time that they deployed this tactic, it would function in the same way. However, it was extremely effective at goading the Orcs' warlike nature to overwhelm their better senses, as the Greenskins would surge forth in the millions, spurred on by the audacious challenge, and within hours the barren plains became a hellish battlefield, choked with smoke and countless explosions along with the screams of the dying. Craters would be filled with the shattered remnants of men and Xenos alike, as the Orc warbands hurled themselves against the defensive positions with reckless abandon. Despite the casualties and the desperate calls for reinforcements, the Iron Hands would always remain resolute, refusing to commit the Legion's full strength until the Orcs' forces were fully exposed. Observers in orbit would watch each and every time this would occur, as the enemy hordes would eventually swell, leaving a tide of dead bodies spreading across the wasteland, consuming it in shadow. On Rust, it was only when the Orcs' numbers reached their peak did the Iron Hands unleash the second phase of their plan. With the enemy committed and their warband spread thin across the plain, the 10th Legion would descend like a thunderbolt. The skies above Rust would burn as Stormbird gunships would deliver wave after wave of legionary into the fray. Armored spearheads along with land raiders and Sicarian battle tanks crashed into the Orc lines as suddenly as they had appeared, shattering what little cohesion the Greenskins or any opponent faced with a hammer and thunderstorm strike would witness. This would be the tactic that the Legion would become famous for. The battlefield itself would become a chaotic melee where just hours earlier it was becoming a slaughter. The Orcs, deprived of their leaders and overwhelmed by the Legion's superior firepower and discipline, would begin to falter. Like any enemy faced with such a threat, what had once been an unstoppable tide of savagery would be reduced to scattered pockets of resistance, hunted down by the Legion's methodical forces. However, to go into further detail, on Rust in particular, the Imperial forces had to go through a storm of Orc anti-air fire and swarming aerial predators. The gunships of the Legion and their landers would need to descend with unyielding speed and precision, as they pierced the swirling tempest of destruction, tearing a path towards the very heart of the Orcs' stronghold. At the core of the armored formations were both Malcador and Mauler tanks. In the shadow of the advancing armored column, the battle's secondary elements would spring into action, as the skimmer and jetbike squadrons of the Legion surged outwards, extending their reach to the flanks and rears of the hammer column. The mission would be twofold: to ensure no surviving Orc pockets would be left to regroup, and to secure the integrity of the Legion's own spearhead. Meanwhile, the Legio Cybernetica would descend next. With its formidable battle automata, they would lend their might to the sweeping actions to eliminate any remaining enemies. With the resounding victory at Rust, their battle tactics became solidified. The 10th Legion honed their strategy and martial identity further during the expansive Seraphenian offensive. Here they employed the devastating hammer and storm strategy once again, demonstrating the calculated precision and unrelenting discipline which had earned them such renown. Against the remaining orcs of the Crooked Claw Empire, the Legion's panache for remorseless and highly coordinated warfare became not merely a tool, but the signature of their rising fame. The 10th Legion's mastery of what they would refer to as set-piece battles, especially those incorporating integrated armored vehicle support, became a defining hallmark of any battlefield they were on. Their successes, particularly against orcs and other aggressive species, were studied extensively by other legions, notably the 4th and the 13th, to the point that they would adopt elements of the 10th's strategy within their own campaigns and military doctrine. During and after the destruction of the Crooked Claw Empire, however, the application of these methods were not universal. Some legions, whether due to their distinct temperaments or their own ingrained fighting styles, including the lack of certain discipline and cohesion between larger elements of said legions, found the precise and methodical approaches to war that the 10th Legion were proponents of to be ill-suited to their capabilities. Either out of pride or differing priorities, they would ignore the lessons learned by the 10th entirely. And so the lack of widespread adoption would only serve to further distinguish the 10th as a uniquely disciplined and cohesive armored force. And as it grew, their identity would take shape. Amongst their constant allies were the Ursharan, a division of the Imperial Army who had fought beside them constantly, to the point that they began to build a reverence towards the Iron Hands, verging on superstition. These soldiers, having witnessed the 10th Legion's calculated ferocity firsthand, coined the moniker Stormwalkers. The name would evoke their mastery over the tempestuous chaos of battle, and to the storm-like sounds which were so interlinked with their combat doctrine, thanks to the constant barrage of artillery and heavy guns. This title would not only encapsulate the awe their human counterparts held for the 10th Legion, but it would quickly spread beyond said human contingent and become as synonymous with the Legion as the Revenant Legion's own title was.
They are not my hands. This fact is forgotten by my brothers. Inexplicably, it has always seemed to me the hands are strong, to be sure, and have created great things for us all. But they are not mine, and that counts for something. They forget that the silver on my arms comes from a beast that I vanquished. It is a mark of a great evil that I ended, and yet it persists with me. I would struggle to remove it now. I will not remove the silver from my flesh because I have learned to depend on it. The fault is with my mind. I rely on the augmentation given to me by my metal gauntlets so much that the flesh beneath them is now little more than a distant memory. A day will come when I will strip it from me, lest I lose the power to master myself forever. Already my legion's warriors replace their shield hands with metal in my honor. And so they too are learning to doubt the natural strength of their bodies. They must be weaned off this practice before it becomes a mania for them. Hatred of what is natural, of what is human, is the first and greatest of the corruptions. So I record it here. When my time comes, I will strip my hands of their unnatural silver. I will instruct my legion to recant their distrust of the flesh. I will turn them away from the gifts of the machine and bid them relearn the masteries of flesh, bone, and blood. When my father's crusade is over, this shall be my sacred task. When the fighting is done, I shall cure my legion and myself. For if fighting is all there is, if we may never pause to reflect on what such devotion to strength is doing to us, then our compulsion will only grow.
Excerpt from the Nemirial Scrolls attributed to Primarch Ferrus Manus. The 10th Legions of Space Marine, later known as the Iron Hands, were in large part shaped by their genetic legacy and their direct interactions with Primarch Ferrus Manus. Like his 19 gene siblings, Ferrus was crafted from the gene seed whose genetic lineage can be traced back to the Emperor of Mankind, and he would function as a living embodiment of the Emperor's grand design for humanity. However, the story of Ferrus Manus, and indeed all the Primarchs, was marked by tragedy from its inception, as before the Great Crusade could take shape, the catastrophic event would unfold, all thanks to the universe's worst mother. The Primarchs, still in their gestation pods, within the Emperor's secret gene laboratories beneath the Himalayan mountains, were scattered across the galaxy. This dispersal, orchestrated by their very gene mother, sent each capsule hurtling into the void straight through hell, stranding the Emperor's creations on distant, isolated worlds. It was through the fateful touch of chaos that some of these Primarchs would be mutated, and it was thanks to the interaction of this very chaotic series of events that the seeds of corruption in many Primarchs were ultimately set. Said seeds being the impetus for the Horus heresy and the betrayal that would sunder the nascent imperium. The journey of Ferrus Manus began on the geologically unstable and storm-racked feral world of Medusa, located within Segmentum Obscurus and rather near the dreaded Eye of Terror. His gestation capsule tore through Medusa's cloud-choked skies, in essence becoming a fiery harbinger of his arrival. The impact was rather cataclysmic as the mountain summit shattered, sending molten steam and ice cascading into the desolate landscape below. Medusa itself seemed to convulse in response to this legendary arrival, as the planet's tectonic plates heaved, toppling mountains and opening vast chasms. According to Medusan lore, the tremors of Ferrus Manus' landing reshaped the world, leaving scars that would endure for millennia to come. Years later, Ferrus Manus emerged from the icy northern wastelands where the ice pinnacle once stood, fully grown and already formidable. He descended upon the nomadic clans of Medusa, which were defined by their harsh and unyielding nature. The Medusans, scattered and perpetually at war with one another, were awestruck by the towering figure who came from the mountains. They named him Ferrus Manus, or Iron-Handed, in ancient High Gothic, a moniker that would become as much his identity as his title. Ferrus quickly gained a reputation amongst the clans as an unmatched and peerless warrior, a figure of nigh unending strength, the hero of the Medusan people, as his feats were the stuff of legends, which were told from father to son as fireside tales. Manus would seek challenges wherever he could, driven by a relentless, almost inborn desire to test himself against the limits of both man and nature. Yet he would be victorious in every trial, allowing Manus to become a living myth. One of the most enduring legends speaks of Ferrus challenging a storm giant to a contest of strength. The giant, a towering ancient, lifted an entire mountain between its hands and set it down a mile away. What became of that contest remains unclear, and what that giant truly was is up to speculation. But the tale would underscore Ferrus's unending hunger for a worthy opponent, and his insatiable drive to overcome what was deemed impossible. Now, to understand Ferrus, we must look into the world itself, Medusa. Medusa itself would mirror much of the character of its adopted son, a world of perpetual storms and shifting tectonic plates where there was an endless and permanent struggle for survival. It forged its inhabitants into a hard, resilient people. This brutal environment shaped Ferrus Manus into an embodiment of unyielding, unending strength, both physically and that of the mind. His story was not merely one of physical power, but a relentless refusal to succumb, regardless of the trials he faced. Ferrus Manus would become a leader and a living embodiment of Medusa's unforgiving ethos. His early exploits, unlike his legions, are rather shrouded in myth and legend, recounted only as odd whispers, but they were merely the first few chapters in the saga of a Primarch who would leave an everlasting mark on the galaxy, despite being the first to fall. In the records of the Imperium's history, few figures tower as large, both literally and figuratively, as Ferrus Manus. His feats, even before becoming the leader of the 10th Legion, were the stuff of legend, from defeating titanic beasts, contests of strength unknown to the rest of the universe, and craftsmanship of peerless quality. Far and wide were many of the legends surrounding Ferrus Manus, and as he became well known around Medusa, people would gather towards him, as Medusa was a world of warlike clans where survival depended on raw power and resilience, and these traits were seen by many to be epitomized by Ferrus Manus, a larger-than-life figure of both stature and deeds, earning him a place within the hearts and minds of all the Medusan tribes. Yet it was not fear alone that granted him this status, as Ferrus Manus demonstrated a wisdom that transcended brute force. Despite his extraordinary power, Ferrus refused to interfere in the constant skirmishes between the clans. To him, their struggle was not a sign of weakness, but of vitality, a crucible in which Medusa's strength was forged. This impartial stance earned him an almost universal acceptance, a rare feat within a land rife with conflict. Over time, he would in essence be adopted by every clan, not merely as a figure of admiration, but truly as one of their own. His neutrality, along with his unmatched strength, elevated him to the status that bordered on the mythic. Scholars have often drawn comparisons between the harsh environments of Medusa and Nocturne to the world that shaped Vulcan, yet another Primarch, as both planets were marked by their savage terrains and primal cultures, due to being shaped by millennia of isolation during the Age of Strife. Yet despite these surface similarities, the people of these two worlds were remarkably and strikingly different. Where the sons of Medusa were fractured and warlike, the people of Nocturne were bound by a sense of community and shared purpose. Ultimately, Medusa's unforgiving nature forged Ferrus Manus into a being of unbreakable resolve. The trials of his youth would become legends in the imaginations of the Medusan people. At this point, the stories surrounding Ferrus Manus are recounted in a harsh oral tradition, and they paint a picture of a figure whose arrival on the world was that of equal drama to his legacy. According to Medusan tales, the Primarch did not descend into the inhabited clan ranges, but instead he came to rest on the northern polar regions of the planet, as his arrival shattered the mountain, which was regarded by Medusans with fear and superstition, believing that it was the place where malignant spirits dwelled, and where there were slumbering monsters of iron. Thus, even just him landing on the planet made Ferrus Manus' journey one as epic as any ancient Terran folklore. From the fractured fields of the north, legends describe that Ferrus wandered the frozen wastes, facing challenges that were as much a test of cunning as they were of his prodigious strength. Tales speak of battles against colossal storm giants, encounters with relic monsters from bygone ages, and mechanized abominations buried deep beneath the ice. Amongst these stories, none stands out as vividly as his confrontation with Asinroth, the great silver worm. Asinroth is central to the Canticle of the Travelers, an epic Medusan poem passed down throughout the generations. This monstrous worm, clad in skin of living metal, was said to possess a resilience greater than the finest armor forged by human hands. Legends tell that Ferrus Manus tracked the creature for days through the fabled Land of Shadows, a realm described as a haunting expanse of colossal ancient relics forged of metal and stone, and said land was said to be a place of mystery and unforgiving terror. Said land was steeped in the essence of the ghosts of the Medusan ancestors. Modern imperial scholars have drawn striking parallels between the descriptions of the Land of Shadows in the Canticle and Necron tomb worlds, discovered millennia later. The massive metallic constructs shared a striking similarity of Necron creations, and the descriptions of the ghostly presences suggest the place might have been a site of a Necron ruin, or perhaps a resting place for a Catan shard. If true, this provides context for Asinroth's existence, as the beast itself may have been a Necron construct forged from necrodermis, a form of living metal unique to the ancient race. The Canticle recounts a titanic struggle between Ferrus Manus and the Great Worm, a battle where raw strength alone would prove insufficient. Though Ferrus struck the beast with the full force of his fury, his blows failed to make any discernible impact on its metallic hide. Ferrus fought with the worm, displaying not only his unparalleled physical might, but also his deep determination and his ingenuity in equal measure. The battle would culminate in a finale where, with a final desperate act of cunning, Ferrus lured the great worm into the edge of a molten river, using the environment itself as a weapon. With an immense effort, he would force the creature into the lava flow, enduring unimaginable pain as he sunk the creature and his hands into the magma. which would sear his own flesh. Azenorth was then consumed by the heat, its living metal body disintegrating in the inferno. When the battle was over, Ferrus discovered that the worm's molten necrodermis had flowed onto his arms during the beast's destruction. When Ferrus withdrew his arms from the lava, he noticed that they were transformed, as the necrodermis had now permanently fused with his arms, up to his forearm, creating a seamless blend of flesh and living metal, stronger than the hardest ceramite, yet more flexible than skin. The canticle claims that the transformation marked not only Ferrus's body, but his very essence, as his eyes, once a mortal shade, became a brilliant silver, their pupils vanishing as the metal seemed to integrate into his very physiology, making the concept of Ferrus ever removing the necrodermis fully from his form potentially impossible. Modern Imperial scholars have debated the implications of Ferrus Manus' encounter with Azenorth. The prevailing theory posits that the Great Worm was indeed a legendary Necron construct, possibly a guardian entity or even a herald of a dormant Catan shard. The necrodermis, which is known to be semi-sentient, likely bonded with Ferrus at a fundamental level, not only physically but spiritually as well, altering him in ways that remain unclear to this day. Some argue that the transformation may have corrupted him, though what form such corruption might take is a subject of severe speculation. For Medusans, however, the story of Azenorth is a source of pride and reverence. It illustrates the rather indomitable spirit of their adopted hero. The myth of Azenorth is not merely a tale of triumph, but it is a glimpse into the intersection between ancient alien technologies and the Primarch's destiny, whether Azenorth was a relic of the Necrons or something far older. Its defeat at Ferrus' hands marked a pivotal point for his rise to greatness, a moment where flesh met metal and history was changed forever. When Ferrus emerged from the frozen desolation of the Northern Realms, he was no longer merely a wandering legend, but a figure of supreme authority upon the world. Known amongst the clans as the Gorgon, it was known that he did not seek their reverence as a deity, though many regarded him as such. Instead, he demanded their obedience, and any who dared defy his will were met with harsh and ruthless violence. His rise was not one of peace or unification, but of harsh domination, forged through trials of blood and fire. Ferrus saw value in the ceaseless conflicts that defined Medusa's clan-driven society, and so he would not bring an end to their warring ways. Rather, he sought to elevate their struggles, ensuring that only the strong would endure. To achieve this end, he worked closely with the Iron Fathers, the spiritual and technological leaders of the Medusan clans. These individuals were a particular fusion of shamanistic mysticism and pragmatic engineering. Ferrus shared with the Iron Fathers the knowledge he had gained during his travels and experiments. His teachings yielded wonders, powerful weapons, and advanced machines, along with techniques that reshaped the Medusan ability to thrive in their harsh environment. With his living metal hands, Ferrus demonstrated the ability to manipulate and shape raw materials into intricate tools and devices without the aid of a hammer or a forge. This extraordinary ability enabled the clans to achieve feats of engineering they had never dreamed as possible. Under his tutelage, Medusa entered an unprecedented age of technological advancement. The once scattered and warring clans grew stronger and were tempered by their newfound technological prowess, and the unforgiving trials of their brutal world were extended, reshaped even, into a new form. But Ferrus would not grant these gifts freely. Those who wished to benefit from his guidance had to prove their worth through the continued struggle and survival that the world had become so known for, a philosophy that would later define the culture of the Iron Hands. Ferrus Manus did not confine his ambitions to the surface of Medusa, as he would lead the bravest of its warrior clans into the frozen underworld, seeking the remnants of the ancient machines buried beneath millennia of ice and ruin. These expeditions were fraught with peril, as the depths were the homes of horrors of forgotten ages. Warrior bands encountered degenerate mutants, living dead cyborgs whose decayed flesh hung in tatters from their ruined mechanical forms, which some scholars believe might have been Necron flayed ones, and colossal dark engines, all these ancient constructs of a nightmarish age long past. Despite these terrors, Ferrus Manus led his people to victory time and time again. through both strength and his unmatched brilliance. The spoils of these exploits, the salvaged materials and ancient technologies, along with fragments of lost knowledge, became the foundation upon which the Medusan clans would continue to thrive. Each conquest reinforced the Gorgon's reputation as a warlord and a sage, a figure who was a blend of brutal force and unparalleled intellect. By the time that the Emperor of Mankind was succumbed to Medusa during the Great Crusade, Ferrus Manus had already transformed the planet, as he was a warlord, a teacher, and a living embodiment of Medusa's own culture. Yet the legends suggest that Ferrus was not surprised by the Emperor's arrival. It is said that he suspected the true purpose of his creation, understanding that his destiny would lay beyond. When the Emperor would come to claim Ferrus Manus as one of his genesons, there would be no resistance, only readiness, as Ferrus had forged himself and his world into something extraordinary, a testament to the iron within his will. Said iron defined him, and it would define how he tested himself against the trials of not only Medusa, but those handed to him by the Emperor. Ferrus Manus would leave a world that bore his indelible mark. The Medusan clans, now armed with even more advanced technology, were strengthened and became ready to face nigh impossible trials, and they would become the foundation for his future legion, the Iron Hands, as their culture reflected the lessons he wished to impart upon his genesons. For the Gorgon, Medusa was more than just a world, or even a home. It was a crucible and a proving ground where his strength, intellect, and will would be tempered, along with that of his genesons. It was here that he prepared for his larger role in the galaxy, not only as a Primarch, but as a legend whose name would echo throughout the history of the Imperium. The people of Medusa would know no peace, but they were no strangers to portents. When the sky was split for a second time in their history, echoing the moment Ferrus Manus arrived on the world, the clans were gripped by an uncertainty, as this was no ordinary event, and it bore the unmistakable weight of significance. Without hesitation or explanation, Ferrus Manus departed from the clans, making his way towards the phenomenon's epicenter. Weeks would pass with uneasy silence, as rumors began to swirl amongst the clans that their savior's absence may have a deeper meaning, stoking fears of abandonment. Then the natural order of the world seemed to rebel. Titanic electrical storms lashed out from the heavens, their bending arcs mirrored by quakes that rumbled throughout Medusa's very bones. For 8 days and nights, the planet seemed on the verge of tearing itself apart. Then suddenly, as it began, the chaos ceased, and an unnatural stillness blanketed the world. A silence so profound that it unnerved even the hardiest of Medusans. On the 9th day, Ferrus Manus returned, yet he was not alone. By his side stood a figure unlike any the clans had ever seen, the Emperor of Mankind, a being radiating authority and power. The Emperor's presence left an impression upon all those who witnessed him. Whatever transpired between these two titanic figures in the remote mountains remains shrouded in a large amount of ambiguity, in large part due to how oral tradition functions. However, most accounts converge on a single theme, a trial of strength and will, one so intense that it unleashed storms and quakes which ravaged the planet. What is certain, though, is that the bond forged by Ferrus Manus and the Emperor was rather deep. When they descended upon high from the mountain ranges together, it was clear that the Gorgon had found a purpose greater than the harsh dominion he had crafted on Medusa. For the first time, Ferrus's stern resolve seemed to be tempered by the acknowledgement of a peer, perhaps even a father. The Emperor had come not merely for the retrieval of his son, but to offer him a destiny amongst the stars. Ferrus Manus would leave Medusa shortly thereafter, journeying with the Emperor to Terra, the cradle of humanity, and the true world of his origin. Yet before his departure, he promised the clans that he would return, for Medusa had forged him, as surely as he had shaped its people, and it would remain his home. Its harsh lessons had been etched into his very being. Ferrus's discovery would mark a significant moment within the Great Crusade, as he was amongst the earliest of the Emperor's lost sons to be found. Like Horus Lupercal and Leman Russ before him, Ferrus Manus had already risen to prominence as a warlord in his own world. Yet, unlike many of his brothers, Ferrus Manus approached his newfound role with a methodical precision and fervent determination that were honestly awe-inspiring to many of them, including the eventual War Master Horus Lupercal. Upon returning to the stars, Ferrus Manus was granted command of the 10th Legion, which at the time was remarked to be one of the Emperor's mightiest Astartes legions. The transition from planetary warlord to one of the generals of the Great Crusade was almost seamless for the Gorgon. His analytical mind and unyielding discipline, along with the hunger for challenge, drove him to reshape the Legion in his image. Ferrus would approach this task with the same meticulous intensity that had defined every aspect of his character. He dismantled the Legion's existing structure with a precision of an artisan, deconstructing the complex mechanisms and analyzing each component before reassembling it into a form that better suited his vision. Under his command, the 10th Legion would become a reflection of its Primarch, a relentless, disciplined, and uncompromising force, one which was guided by its pursuit of perfection. When Ferrus assumed command of the 10th Legion, his vision for the future was as harsh as the world that shaped him. Like many of his brother Primarchs, Ferrus chose his foster world, Medusa, as the foundation upon which he would reshape his legion, but his approach was anything but conciliatory. In uniting the Terran-founded Astartes with the nomadic Medusan clans, Ferrus forged a new identity for the legion, one born from the crucible of hardship that he seemed to be so obsessed with. Ferrus Manus dissolved the Legion's existing structures, abolishing the Terran-style chapters and replacing them with clans, a cultural reflection of Medusa's own societal framework. Yet this change was not mere symbolism, it was enforced with a brutal decisiveness. The Terran Space Marines were ordered to subjugate Medusa's existing clan leadership, both secular and spiritual, through displays of sheer might. The battles that followed were not merely skirmishes, but existential trials that tested the worthiness of the Medusan clans to serve their new masters. In time, the Iron Hands would become a hybrid entity, its foundation rooted in the values of Medusa while retaining the technological expertise and disciplines of its Terran origins. The Astartes walked amongst the Medusan clans as demigods, towering figures who demonstrated both obedience and sacrifice. Life under the Iron Hands would become one of a relentless and unending struggle, but it also offered the clans a chance to contribute to something far greater than themselves. For the Medusan people, survival alone was not the goal anymore. Instead, they fought to endure so they may prove their worth, hoping that their children may ascend to the ranks of the Legion someday. The arrival of the Iron Hands would do little to soften the harsh existence of Medusa. Ferrus Manus made no effort and essentially guided his Legion to do the same, to follow his example so they may not lessen the suffering of his people, for he believed that hardship was the ultimate crucible through which the weak would be culled, leaving only the strong and resilient. The trials of Medusan life became significantly harsher, ensuring that only those with the necessary physical strength, martial skill, and psychological fortitude to survive would be deemed worthy to enter the Legion. Yet Medusa's small population presented a rather notable logistical challenge. To address this, Ferrus Manus implemented a system of enforced recruitment from conquered worlds. On planets that resisted imperial compliance, the Iron Hands imposed a tithe of adolescent males, selected by the priests of the Mechanicum. These youths were transported to Medusa, where they were thrown into the same grueling existence endured by the nomadic clans. Here they would be expected to survive the planet's trials and assimilate into its culture, so they may prove themselves worthy. Those who succeeded would become aspirants, eligible to undergo the transformation into Astartes upon reaching maturity. Those who would not would just become nutrients for the world. This system of enforced struggle and brutal selection shaped the Iron Hands into a force of unparalleled discipline and ferocity. The bleak ethos of Medusa became the Legion's creed, passed down to every new generation of warriors. Ferrus Manus ensured that his Legion embodied the values of resilience and strength, along with ruthless efficiency. In uniting the 10th Legion and the nomadic clans, Ferrus Manus did more than just forge a fighting force. He created a completely new culture. The Iron Hands would become a living reflection of their Primarch's ideals, and so too would the world itself. Every action a testament to the belief that weakness was unforgivable, and that only through struggle could greatness be achieved. Thus, the legacy of Medusa and its grim creed would endure well into the 42nd millennium.